And I'd like to welcome all of you to our first session of a new little mini project we're doing, a Bisl Digi. One-off events on very specific topics that have to do with our Klezmer Kiselhof repertoire. Today we're talking about Hasidic music. We have a session coming up soon with Sarah and Gabriel, who we're gonna do some work. We're gonna just work together to try to identify high holidays repertoire in the Kiselhof materials. We're gonna look at that, talk about that, and then the last session is on what is the last session on, Clara?
The text translation. So we're gonna have Hannah and Reuven guide us through all of the work that's already been done on the translations, which is astonishing. And
Yes.
so there's plenty to learn there.
Great. And you can let us know. This is a new kind of an idea that we're trying out. And so please feel free to give us feedback. Send me email or send email to the info thing about how you like these sessions and ways that we can make them better, or things that you might like to change, stuff like that, because we want to be serving the community in this way. But our idea with these sessions is to take the conversations that we often have on the bandstand or over coffee or in two-person conversations or maybe three-person conversations, and bring them out into public spaces where more people can participate in them. And so rather than being a presentation where we're going to, have Jordan give us slides and a lecture followed by questions, we're going to just have the conversation together, all of us in this room. And so I want to invite you to feel free to raise your hand if we're talking about something and you want to make a point or you have a supplemental question. Use the raise hand button, or otherwise, wave your arms around so that we can see you. I have everybody on screen here right now, but it may be that if more people join, we'll end up on two screens. So please use that function. And I'm going to introduce Jordan here, who really needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway because he sent me his bio, and I am bound and determined to read part of it at least. And he writes, Is it okay if I introduce you just a little bit? I'm gonna do a little bit of introducing of Jordan, actually, not based on what he wrote, but what I know about Jordan, which is that we've encountered what to my ears sounds like Hasidic music in this Kiselhof repertoire as we're doing our play-along sessions. And Richard is a party to that. He's got very sharp ears about making these identifications. And so to have a conversation about this topic, I could think of no one better than Jordan to bring into the room, because you have such a deep knowledge, deep sort of lived experience of playing with Hasidic music on the bandstand. And that's part of your training as a klezmer. And you've kind of played. I'm looking at your bio, and basically you've kind of played with everybody, and that also gives you a great depth of experience to be able to bring into this conversation, along with our other honored and esteemed guests such as Zev, who seems to have disappeared. Oh no, he's not. He hasn't disappeared. And Sherry and Uzi, of course, and all of our other friends here. So, without further ado. We came up with 3 questions to sort of guide our discussion, and we're going to sort of ramble around them, but let me read them to you up front. First off, basic question: what is a Hasidic tune? How do we know? What are there ways that we can define what is Hasidic from maybe a musicological perspective? In addition to its placement within a Hasidic community. Are there other ways that we can identify what is a Hasidic tune? Number 2 is, can we tell, just by looking at our manuscripts, if what we have in front of us is a Hasidic tune, if we are not given textual guidance about it? Like, as Jordan mentioned earlier, if there's a tune that says that it's a Tishnigan, we might be fairly confident that it's probably from a Hasidic origin. But are there other ways that we can use the manuscripts to be able to intuit whether or not something has a Hasidic origin, and if so, what skills do we need to bring into that space in order to be making those kinds of judgments. And then the third question is, does it matter? And if it does matter, why and how does it matter? Like, and in asking that question of why we would want to be trying to identify whether something is or is not sort of Hasidic, if that has any bearing on how we understand the way that we classify klezmer music and instrumental Jewish music,
Right.
Full stop. So Sherry, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I would add a fourth question.
Okay.
To what extent does any recognizable Hasidic repertoire back from the manuscripts, like from the 19th century, basically, probably, or certainly from the early 20th century, still recognizably itself in the 21st century?
Okay.
All right.
Okay, so I guess I'm the interlocutor, so am I supposed to say something?
Yeah, let's kick us off, because you mentioned the what is a Hasidic tune thing, that we should just cover that ground a little bit.
So just to sort of prompt some of the discussion, I've given obviously I've given a lot of thought to these questions. And Sherry, I think actually your question, it's really interesting. I had just said to Christine on Friday, when we were sort of schmoozing around about what we were going to discuss. One of the things that, and this is something I haven't really started doing yet, only because I'll share with everybody a piece of nice news. I don't really do this on social media, but Alan Klein and a few others here know this. My daughter got married a week and a half ago. So we were in the month of June, we were mostly preparing to make a chasana. So I'm sure you can imagine that all that goes with it. So I was kind of preoccupied with picking up tuxedos and tablecloths and whatnot. So having said that, the happy couple is now ensconced in Savannah, Georgia, where my new son-in-law will be assuming the role as the rabbi of a conservative synagogue down there. So that's the nice news, and it's been wonderful. But what I haven't been able to do, that I think is actually going to be what I'm going to be spending basically the next 2 weeks doing, mostly in preparation for my class, for two of my classes that I'll be teaching at Kles Canada, and hopefully if I'm accepted, what I'll do at Yiddish New York too. I put in an application for that. We'll see how that goes. Is to actually see the through lines, see if there are any through lines in repertoire. And so I want to put that question back for a second and go to the first question, which is, what is a Hasidic tune? And the reason why I brought up that question is because I've been really wondering, and I'm so glad that Zev is here, because I think he can probably speak to that, on a much deeper scholarly level. But I'm wondering, I think there's certain songs that we know aren't Hasidic tunes. I think when I'm not trying to butter up Zev when I say this, but obviously the besides the first chapters of the Klezmer book, but the famous essay from, like, is it 96 or 97, where he talks about the Bulgar, I think that we can safely say that the Bulgar repertoire, especially the ones that the American virtuoso Klezmerim latched onto as part of sort of their heritage, I think we can safely say that those don't have origins in Hasidic nigunology, so to speak, although through a back door of the Israeli, or I should say early Palestinian experience, meaning 1910, 1912, 1915, through a back door, some of those Bulgars actually made it into Hasidic repertoire in an interesting way, which we could talk about. So I think we know that there's some things which aren't Hasidic repertoire. What interests me more, I think, in the discussion of what is a Hasidic tune is, does it matter if a tune is Hasidic, or does it matter if it's from a region or town or settlement or city where many Hasidim and Misnagdim lived? For instance, what I mean is, I know a lot of Stoliner Nigunim. I know a lot of Lubavitcher Nigunim. There are certain musical characteristics that are similar between Stoliner and Lubavitcher Nigunim. I've spoken about this with my resident Belarus expert, Zisel Slavovich, and he confirmed my suspicion about certain things, like certain uneven measures and uneven measures and stuff like that. And I'm wondering, for instance, is a Hasidic tune from Belarus, Lithuania, or the parts of Russia proper where Jews may have lived, and there aren't so many. The Lubavitchers kind of were like on the edge of that. Were the Hasidic tunes of those Hasidic groups markedly different from the Misnagdim in Lithuania at a wedding, let's say? So, for instance, if you were a follower of the Vilna Gaon and you were a Misnagid, you also danced at weddings. Is it more important that there are regional similarities, or is there something specific that we can say is Hasidic in nature? So I think part of the answer to that question is, but to the extent that we can answer that question, is functionality. All right, we're not going to have the same kind of Tish Nigunim in a Kalta Litvak yeshiva as we might have at a Hasidic Tish. So there's functionality. There's a use of certain repertoire, marches, operas, things like that mark the music of the Hasidic court. I think we know about the functionality part of that question, but in terms of the actual sort of musicological characteristics, they move up a fourth. They have limited harmonic language. They maybe have limited melodic shapes because they wanted to be, I wonder, and again, I don't know the answer to this question, but I wonder if maybe we should be, where it's more fruitful sometimes to be discussing geographic categories for, let's say, dance nigunim than it is to discuss whether it's a Hasidic tune. So let's throw that out as kind of a sort of sub question of my question.
Right. So I know Zev has his hand up, but I'm going to just say that Zev has identified this north and south split division, where the northern radal tunes tend to have more simple structures than the southern tunes, and I don't know, Zev, if that's what you want to amplify. And so, but by saying that sort of speaks to what you've just said, which is that
right. I read the chapter in the book, which is why I wondered, obviously. But I would say that even with that, though, let's talk about it as a subcategory. When we talk about the southern music of southern, the Jews of southern parts of Eastern Europe, is that because of, or is that coincident to the fact that there might be, let's say, a Romanian Moldovan influence that shows up in the tune writing, or we have that sort of transitional repertoire, to use Zev's category terminology. So.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. Okay, now I can spiel a little bit.
You can spiel a little bit.
Okay, look, Hasidic music is one of the most original and creative features of Ashkenazic music, period. It has no parallel among any other community, Jewish community in the world. That's the first thing. And it has not been studied properly. At least Berezovsky started to make a collection, and his introduction is very good. Mark Slobin translated the Russian introduction to his Nigun collection, which I think we should probably post if we can get Mark's permission. As far as North and South, the North and South is primarily an internal Jewish affair, nothing to do with transitional repertoires. And in general, but by the way, the Jews in general everywhere like the Moldavian, Romanian element and the Greek element. It goes back, as I'm writing more and more now, it goes back to much earlier context between the Ottomans and the Ashkenazim. So it has a centuries-old history before the transitional repertoire. And indeed, Chabad, Lubavitch, has their own Valach repertoire that was invented in the southern Ukraine and went from there up to Lithuania and Belarus. That being said, first things to ask is music for dancing or music for the table of the Rebbe? Those are vastly different worlds. And everybody, all Hasidim, had a vastly different repertoire for listening at the Rebbe's table. And it's often quite remote from dance music. In terms of dance music, what I see is that the Jewish South was much more creative than the Jewish North. And that the Hasidic South was also much more creative, in the sense that Hasidic dance tunes from, if you just look at Berezovsky, look at things from Bratslav or from the other courts in southern Ukraine, they're very different from Freilach's or the dance music, the secular dance music, very different. Whereas we know from Kiselgov's earliest field work in Lubavitch that there in my chapter on North and South are identified, almost all their dance tunes are redels, period. There was very little difference in the North for those kind of dances. Solo dancing, again, is another story. Jews did solo dancing both in the North and in the South. Right? Now, the listening music has a heavy imprint from synagogue singing, but it's been rhythmicized in very particular ways, both in the North and in the South differently. In general, the thing to remember is that the Hasidic courts made a point of being different from each other. They wanted to be different. They wanted to sound different. That was part of the charisma of a different group. The other Jewish genres, you don't have that to the same degree. Right? And if you have a shared repertoire that all the Hasidim know, it was called a Weltnigun.
Yeah.
Right? That everybody knew. Okay, so that's, I think, an introduction to just get the idea.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
and I think that that's really interesting, because of course, this exactly addresses how to break down the categories of discussing this stuff. And you did it much more eloquently than I attempted to do. But I will also, so I'll say something really interesting about that, just in my recent personal experience. So when I first started playing, and here's, I guess, the part where my sort of personal experience comes to play. When I first started playing weddings, let's say in the 1980s, working, and I met, I'm sure Zev, you remember this character, Betsy and Moshe Rosenberg. I don't know if you remember him, a Satmar guy who was a not terribly good clarinet player, but he loved Dave Taras, and he went and studied with Dave right around the time that Andy Statman was going to Dave to play some clarinet with him. And he was not a great clarinet player, but he loved the repertoire. So he loved the Bulgar Dave Taras repertoire, but he was a Hasidic band leader first for Nagina and then Azon, which is how I had done some Nagina jobs, and they had kind of dominated the market after the Epstein brothers moved to Florida. So they dominated, and they already had started in the late 60s to shove the Epsteins out in the Satmar market, which was the biggest market at the time, much bigger than Lubavitch. Lubavitch was a kind of separate subcategory in terms of the actual frequency of work. And Lubavitch had their own in-house people. They had Eli Lipsker and a few other people like that. So when I first started playing the Hasidic weddings, if you played a Hasidic wedding in the Satmar-based medrash or Hasidic Sheverbachs and Satmar-based medrash with Mitzi Moshe Rosenberg, and I was there as a junior character, they would put me on a second trumpet because I was too young, I was inexperienced, and that's great because I got to sit and really listen. I mean, later on, I assumed more leadership roles as a musician. There was no question that the repertoire is much more specific. The idea that you would play a Lubavitch tune at a Satmar wedding was anathema. It would never, ever, ever happen.
No.
It would never happen. If you went to Square, you played Square Nigunim. If you played a Satmar wedding, you could play Satmar, you could play a little Munkach, you could play some Stollen, but that's because the Satmar and the Stollen lived close to each other, so there's sometimes social intercourse. So for instance, you could play at a Satmar wedding, and that would be fine, even though that's a Stollen Nigun. But you wouldn't play Lubavitch. You wouldn't necessarily play Ger Nigunim. You might play some Visions Nigunim. I think that has something to do with where they lived, not in Europe, but where they lived in America. And Babov had its own repertoire, and so on and so forth. Nowadays, even at the Rebbe Chasanas, will play Lubavitcher Nigunim for Satmar Hasidim.
Wow.
So I think that this is sort of America kind of influencing how Hasidim experience their music a little bit. And even Lubavitcher musicians will play for Satmar and vice versa on occasion. Not in the real inside Satmar, which is a whole other world, which I've gotten a little bit of a taste of. Well, inside Satmar and general Satmar are not the same. And I've gotten into the inside Satmar thanks to my students, believe it or not.
Wow.
And there you'll play Nigunim that you don't play anywhere else. You'll have some common Nigunim also. So the idea of a Weltnigun is like almost all Nigunim nowadays are becoming Welt Nigunim, which I think is really, really interesting. So when we talk about those characteristics of Southern and Northern Nigunim, I think that's something really beautiful about the sort of a stark beauty about the Northern Nigunim, without some of that complexity. but now those northern nigunim are showing up in Satmar weddings, in more southerly groups as well. And so I think that what we'll say about all this 100 years from now may be even different than this. So I think that that's an interesting development about the north-south interaction.
Remember, Satmar is something else, neither north nor south.
Right. Well, I mean, it's on that little corner where Ukraine and Hungary and Romania and Czechoslovakia meet. It's that.
Yeah, but the point is that in their territory, the klezmer profession was not flourishing in the 19th century.
That's I'm gonna.
There was no Satmar in the 19th century.
Hmm?
There was no Satmar in the 19th century. Satmar is a 20th century Hasidus. Interestingly enough, it's a break off from Sighet.
From Sighet, yeah, but in Sighet, then I mean that it's different than the Russian Empire, or it's a different. It's quite a different story because the legal status of musicians and Jews were different.
Okay, I'm going to stop that very fascinating and interesting thread that we are all interested in, but is going to take us on a tangent that if we can circle back to if we get time. But I want to, with that sort of an overview, I know you've prepared some examples, Jordan. So like, let's, we sort of, in my listing of questions, I forgot to sort of relate us all to the repertoire that we have in front of us, which is our Kiselhof material. So let's, since that's kind of why we're all here, is to like do this investigation of our Kiselhof repertoire in front of us. Like, let's dig in. Jordan, did you?
Well, I just looked over the list of things that you had said that the play along class was reacting to, and I threw in a few of my own. But this leads me back to that other question, which we're seeing so much of in the I'm just moving my download stuff around a little bit. There's that one and there's that one, which impresses me so much that when you look at the stuff that isn't Bulgar or Hora Bulgar, very specifically labeled, it seems that so many of the things that are labeled as Freilach's Skachnis, to me, could very easily be Hasidic music, which leads me, of course, to what we said before, which is in some ways isn't really way more of the repertoire Hasidic to begin with, or found in Hasidic communities, usable for Hasidic communities as dance music. I think if we were to get involved in discussing Tish Nigunim or some of the other court music, I think that would maybe lead us down a path that would be, I mean, frankly, a really hard to sort of, get off of. It's a lot of stuff to do. So can I upload, do I have hosting privileges? I can share screen?
Let me make you a,
or it says I can share screen, I think.
Yeah, I usually keep it open, so.
Okay. So my first tune I saw was this Nat Seelan Tishnigan, but I want to just talk about what I see in it.
Okay, and I'm just sorry to interrupt you, Jordan. I want you to share in just a minute, but for all of you, Richard Leskin, Eric, if you have, Sherry, if you've been poking around in the repertoire and you have a tune that you have a burning question about, that you want to know more about, while we have Zev and Jordan and everybody here in the room together, and Bob, you too, look for that number and cue it up, and we'll try to pull it up, have you share the tune, and we'll talk about it and maybe play it. But with that interruption, I will back to you, Jordan, and I have a tune also. Once we do your Tishnigan, I have a tune that I
so this is a Tishnigan. I'm going to share this just to the screen. I think it's quite obviously it's Hasidic, but I just want to talk a little bit about some of the little characteristics that I see, and I can't make I'm not sure I can make a complete musicological case, because that would require me to study. I think that would require a way further survey than I'm prepared to do this moment. Although, like I said, my next 2 weeks in preparation for my Class Canada classes, which are really repertoire classes more than, they're not really ethnomusicology classes, but repertoire classes. But I want to try and create some of those through lines. And I think that as I do that, I'm going to try and start looking for things that I think matter. So I'm sharing this Tishni again. Can we all see that?
We see a blank. I see a black screen.
Okay.
Oh, there it is.
So this is a really nice Tishnigan. So I think that well, if we were to sing it, let's just get a starting note. Ya do da ya da. Playing pianos backwards is not so easy. Da do da da. Oh, sorry. I have a bad habit. I use my piano when I'm practicing trumpet, so I play the piano on B flat even when something's in C. Ya do da 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 ya da 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 ya do da. Right, so that sorry, so that fourth leap, then that minor third leap after that, right? I think that that's like real classic sort of Hasidic nigunology, but just also the idea of kind of the accents, the ornaments built into the way the melody was transcribed. I think that leads me to the first characteristic I think you look for when we say, is this tune Hasidic, which is it singable? Is it singable by people who aren't trained? Is it singable by people where the mesharer, the musical secretary or the musical performer, or the court, singer, is going to teach the niggin? Right? Those are like if we were doing the beginning of the Schenker analysis of this. Right? Fourth, starting on the fifth, if we're talking about fifths, starting on the five, going to the one, going to the minor third, ending up the five, going back to the one, and then maybe there'll be some fourth movement. Right? So then the second part. Right? It's all built around chord tones that are easily learnable, easily singable. And I think that in Hasidic singing, I think it's something I think also related to what you might hear in synagogue music, the cantorial, the sort of that interplay between the cantorial and instrumental interchange. And I think it's not a one-way street. I think it's a two-way street.
Jordan?
Yeah.
Eleanor has asked the question of whether it would be possible to hear this tune before we discuss it. And so sure. You could play it on the trumpet if sure. You have it.
I'm going to play it in the trumpet in the wrong key.
Okay.
I'll play in the right key. What the heck? I'm going to pull away from the screen a little bit. So here's the tune, right? And that's the first part. The second part. And then the third part, I'm just going to scroll up a little bit. And then it goes back to the second section, and that's also an important characteristic of Hasidic music, so that the ending is the end of this section. Important thing to note, when we have a descendio, going back to the B section of a Hasidic tune, it's not like in classical music when you have a descent, when you have a classical score and if there's a Delsenio, you don't do the repeats in the Delsenio. It happens in jazz charts also, any kind of commercial charts. In Hasidic tunes, the Delsenio means you're basically playing A, B, B, C, C, B, B. But that's an immediate marker that's a clue that it's probably a Hasidic tune. And while there may be some Eastern European ethnomusicological reason for it, what the Hasidim will tell you is that's the four sections in that order represent the four letters of God's name in the Torah, right? Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. Now, that may be a post facto explanation. I don't really know. But that structure is itself an immediate giveaway that it very likely has Hasidic roots. But if you see, the intervals are all pretty easily graspable. You do find harder intervals in some Hasidic songs, but the fact that this is eminently singable, eminently learnable in a short amount of time tells me that from a functional point of view, this would actually be a really good song to do in the informal setting of a tish where people are learning songs from each other. Or from the Meshurer, from the musical minister of the, trying to find a word, an analog, but maybe, if anybody's played in church, and especially in a Baptist church, know this as I have, on Easter in the Milchon basic, but that's not the story altogether. There's a minister of music. So I
like the ministry of music.
The
I don't think that's what they call it in the church.
The minister of music. So I think that those right away are some clues you can look for. The use of these simple intervals, simple graspable intervals in the melody, the Yud Hey Vav Hey song structure, and I think those right away, and those characteristic elements that we see in the instrumental and cantorial music of sort of like on strong accents having these like it built into the melody, ya ba bye bye bye. And then, the typical ornaments that you see around, but like you see in a lot of Hasidim, I think on strong beats, you get these like, yeah, bye, not just bye. Okay, so those are that's I'll sell that as a Hasidic tune, but we can use that kind of as a dugma, a kind of a template that we can then use to see if we can capture those things in other songs.
So that's great, Jordan. Before we move off of this tune, I have a question. This is a little bit for you, Jordan, but it's also for Zev. And I also we're going to open the space for if anybody else has a question about this particular tune or a comment that you'd like to make. But my question is, Zev and Jordan, at measure 21, I see, and at measure 23, we see this classic thing that we know from Dobry Den. It's not exactly that, but is that just me wanting to see a connection that isn't there? Or is there something that you have to say about that or want to say about that, either of you two, Jordan or Zev?
So I'll start off because I'll give the more simple answer because I don't understand. I know Dobry Dens and I've played Dobry Dens, but I don't understand them that well, other than what they did as a function. But I see that rhythmic pattern showing up in a lot of Nigunim. It does show up.
Yeah.
It's not foreign to me, and I'm not gonna. And if there's a connection to Dobry Den, that wouldn't surprise me as something that would just be this is a thing we like to use in our songs. More than that, I don't want to. I'm loth to say.
Cool, Zev, you have a comment on that?
Zev's not unmuted.
I can't see him because he's.
I see him.
There you are. Zev, do you have a comment about this?
I certainly do. But
Why am I not surprised, Zev?
Well, listen, am I hearable and visible? Because I don't.
Yes.
Okay. Now I have a chapter called Moral Nigunim, which is basically about the Dobry Den and so forth, and. The idea is that the Dobry Den was a moral nigunim, was a tune of deep ethical meaning, and those things, the Tish Nigun and the wedding rituals interconnect. They're separate. One point is that this rhythm in the Ashkenaz culture, dum da dum da da da, for us it's not dance music. It's deep moralish and listening music. And so it has one function within the Tish Nigun, another function within the wedding. And actually, Mikhail Lukin has done some research about the deeper roots of this rhythm, first within Polish music and even earlier within Czech music. So it's been in Ashkenaz music for centuries. And for us, it's not, it wasn't dance music. It was, as I say, deeper music. Now this, I can see, is not a Dobriden. It is indeed what it says it is. It's a Tishnigan.
Of course. I'm not claiming that it isn't. I just was commenting on the fact
that appears.
Rhythmic tick there. That's all I wanted to.
The point is Tishnigan and Dobriden are cousins.
Right.
And in fact, many of the Shabbos Zmiras, and in Elusive Klezmer, I have a section about this, that some of the Shabbos Zmiras in 3 are alluding to the Dobriden as well, I believe, because, if you remember long ago, the Klezmorim used to play before Shabbos in the shuls in Prague. That was an important function. And they were welcoming the Sabbath bride. So in the Jewish culture, the idea of Shabbos was connected with a wedding. And this is a very deep musical, connection that you have in Ashkenaz music. So it appears in Klezmer music, which is, of course, older than Hasidism, remember. A couple of hundred years older than Hasidism. The Hasidim then developed this in a very original way. And again, not to forget that Hasidic courts of any stature had their own Klezmorim. Their own Klezmorim, who worked with their own Chazunim.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something which is not in the American scene in the same way.
Right.
No, because most Hasidic groups did not come to America with their own klezmorim.
Right. Well, the Mudgets was probably the last one to have a real Masharer, which has been seen in Schenker. See,
of course.
They had a Masharer, and
But he was not a klezmer. I'm talking about klezmorim. They had their own klezmorim.
Yankel Talmud is the closest one from Ger.
Closest, yeah.
The closest one from Ger as a klezmer. The Masharer, like I said, I've been seeing was a Masharer. But Yankel Talmud was a klezmer. He was I actually know someone who played gigs with him as an old man. He was an old man who played gigs with him in the 70s.
Oh.
I know. It's interesting, right?
Actually, I wish we could invite Andy Statman to this discussion.
Yeah. Wow.
He would have interesting things to say.
Let's say that this is something that Jordan and I talked about. I'm jumping in.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan and I talked about, we're at the very beginning of this. This is not the final question.
Of course not.
We're really just beginning our investigation of this.
Did Andy play with Yankel Talmud? Did he get to meet Yankel Talmud?
I don't know.
No, but
but
Yankel Talmud was I don't know if he would call himself a klezmer, but he was a musician of the Gerer. He was a songwriter and a musician of the Gerer world.
That's something, again, related but different.
Yeah.
Because in Europe, there were real klezmer. Look, Dave Taras and Naftali Brandwein both came from klezmer Hasidic lineages.
Yes, this I know.
Right?
As I read your book. That's like the famous scene in Patton when Patton yells and goes, "Ramo, I read your book."
Oh, wow.
So
okay, but I'm not the only source for this. I think it's common knowledge for Brandwein and Taras.
Of course, and actually, you're shilling now for one of my classes at Class Canada, because I'm actually the Zmiros, the 3/4 Zmiros repertoire is something that we'll be actually doing.
Oh, good. Let me just apropos, Jordan.
Zev, wait, hold up. Yeah. Zev, hold up one second. Yeah. Jordan, can you stop sharing Can you stop sharing?
Sure, absolutely.
Sure.
Stop sharing?
Yeah. I want to be able to see Zev and everybody else.
Okay.
We're going to put everybody in the same room.
I'm not going to be pulling my beard because I don't have one. But, but again, the melodic structure of this is just pure nusach. It's not that a question of is easy or difficult. It's davening. It's a rhythm, as my wife Judith would say, it's a rhythmicized form of davening. And that's what most Hasidic Tishnigunim are. Now, the Dobriden has that too, 80% of it perhaps, but here and there, Dobridens have other kinds of melodic modulations and things that come in, whereas this doesn't. This is, this is nusach, and nothing but the nusach.
Right.
Okay.
But I would say that it's not. I don't think it's an accident. I don't think it's an accident that nusach exhibits some of these characteristics. I think that the fact is that it has to be something that's workable. That might necessarily be true for cantorial florid cantorial.
No. Au contraire.
Yeah.
But again, look, Judith hasn't yet done, all that can be done and said about the davening and the modalities, the modulations thereof. It's a very, very intricate and subtle subject.
She should continue to work on this. I will try to convince her to let me post up a beautiful article that she wrote many, many years ago that's called The Rhythmization of, it's like The Rhythmization of Nusach, which is a really nice introduction to that topic for those of us who are in this room who are interested. But Bob, I see you have your hand up. So,
well, I was going to try to inspire a change of subject slightly within our time frame. I was hoping we would see, Jordan, an example of what looks at first to be ordinary klezmer repertoire that you would attribute to Hasidic repertoire.
Sure, I have that.
As from the set.
Okay, cool.
So I can definitely point to things that instinctively look to me like Hasidic music. Let me see if I can find the right one.
So let me play my.
While you're doing that, if you want.
I'm gonna show and tell my piece because this is the one that sort of really the first one. It's in our friend Motel Rader's notebook. That sort of tipped me off. I mean, and there's clues all over it, but it was the first one was like, our Motel Raider, who we think of as this guy with all the bulgars and the auras and all of the, he's got a lot of transitional repertoire. He's got hongas, he's got all kinds of things. But this little piece pops up as a skachna. So let's do that, and I'll play it on my accordion.
Okay, which I'm curious to see which one you have because I also picked out a Motel Raider one. This is one from the list you sent me.
Is that the same piece?
No, this is not the one I had in mind, but you sent me this one, so I saw it yesterday. I'm like, yep.
Yeah. And I'm gonna play it like a klezmer musician because I'm not sure how it would be done properly as a niggin or as a song piece. And I'm playing the accordion and not singing, so.
Play it the way Motel would play it.
Yeah, maybe. On the fiddle. Ugh.
Oh yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, I don't know. It's. I think you can sing it, but it feels very dance-like to me. But I don't. That's my question. You know, is this something that you would sing at a table? Would you?
Okay, so I want to make I want to make a distinction. When I say something singable, that may apply to dancing also.
Yes, of course. But I think
I mean that people sing while they dance.
Absolutely.
And Ruben actually put in the chat. He says it reminds him of 740. So I'll just tell you that if you think about that song, all right, get rid of the ornamental parts of the melody, right?
Yeah.
Bye. Yai, bye. It's.
Oh yeah, totally.
I think this is a very apt choice, and not just for the architecture of the song, but I mean, look at the elements; they're there. And again, I think that I love what you said, because that's a much easier way of saying what I was trying to say, which is to say, looking at the nusach elements of that song, right there. It is in the nusach. It doesn't have fancy modulations, So I think that's a clue, and plus the structure, and plus. But I also think the rhythmic part of the melody, and maybe you can address this. You think about it. All these Hasidic songs are going, yeah, bye, 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 bye. Like I wouldn't necessarily say you have to sing it, ba, 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 ba. You might go ba, 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 but you're definitely going to sing, yeah, bye, 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 right? And I think that's something that's definitely
good point, Jordan. But again, I go back to that. Remember, there used to be Hasidic Klezmer. This is Hasidic Klezmer music.
Absolutely.
This is Hasidic Klezmer music. And in fact, Skochna, and this is unfortunately not in my book, hopefully it'll be in Elusive Klezmer. I mentioned in several talks I did, I think for London, about Skochna, for Ilana, that several of the tunes in Belf that have religious titles appear in Beragovsky as Skochna.
And also in Motel Rather, and also in Motel Rather as Skochna.
Exactly. Because, so this is Hasidic Klezmer music, and it was instrumental. Motel was a Klezmer.
Yes.
He wasn't going to sing his own tune. He was going to play his tune.
Yes.
Okay.
But I mean that the dancers sing.
Oh, now they do, perhaps, yes. But remember, there's been an enormous sea change in Hasidic dance in America.
Yes.
Even I noticed the change in the 1970s,
yes.
by the way, that the tempos increased enormously.
Yes, they did.
Enormously. And I'm old enough to remember Hasidim who first came over from Europe after the Shoah. And it was a very different story.
Okay, I have another question about this tune, and this is a question about harmonization, and this is you're going to tell me, both of you or all of us are going to wonder about this, but I feel like in most of the sort of klezmery, non-Hasidic music that I play, I don't have the instinct to go in the B part. I'm going to share my screen again and say that I'm just going to play this B part right here as a way to show what I'm thinking about.
I know what you're thinking about already.
Yeah?
Yeah, but I'll let you say it.
Right? So that movement, that instinct to do that, I find that I only find in the more Hasidic repertoire that I play, and I don't play a lot of it, but I don't do that. I don't feel like I do that often in my usual klezmer playing, and I don't know. Is that a true thing? Is that just me? Like, and is that what you thought I was going to say, Jordan?
No, that's actually not. I thought you were going to say something different, but that's cool too. But
okay, well, let's talk about the other.
That might be a miniature example of what I was thinking of, which is going to a fourth away, and sometimes the relative major in Hasidic tunes, which I also wonder about. Which I wonder about whether that's really authentic. I mean, we all do it now.
We all do it now. You don't have to do it. You don't have to do it, and I do it because I've heard other people doing it. Right? You don't
even get me started on the famous Simintov that everybody knows.
Yeah. Right. Well, I'll tell you, I played one the other day where there were no changes in that place. There was I played one with Winograd where there was none of that silliness. Bob Blacksburg, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to comment. Measures 10 and 11 in that chart is an example of a two-measure quote that sounds an awful lot like what we sing in other places. So that sounds like V'ha'er Einenu, or at least a popular V'ha'er Einenu. Now, I know V'ha'er Einenu, V'ha'er Einenu.
Tahir Libenu. You think even Tahir Libenu.
What's that?
Tahir
Libenu. I'm sorry. Right, that's what I mean. Thank you. But close. In any case, there's a lot of places that we see these little couple of measure phrases that sound like what we're hearing in other, especially liturgical contexts. And I'm wondering your thoughts on which way one, it's delightful to see in a 1910 source, right? So that we know that not only, this is our version of ancient sources. And it's also, which way did it travel? You know, was it back there? Was it being used? Was the Klezmer quoting a piece of what was a larger liturgical piece, and then incorporating it into a more danceable context? So, just thoughts.
That's definitely a Zev question.
Yeah,
But
Jordan,
I feel like I know what Zev's prejudice is about that, but maybe I'm wrong.
so did we cover the thing that you thought that I was going to talk about? But
No, we didn't well, I just made that passing reference whether you were going to wonder about going to the relative major in Hasidic songs and whether they were really doing that. I mean, I think that I think that they do that sometimes, but I don't think that that's as quite as common as we did. That's where I thought you were going with it, but you didn't. You went to a
Well,
different
I do. I have an instinct to do that in the third part, you know, and as an optional thing. And I feel like I just there's something about the musicological sort of structure of the tunes that I associate with being Hasidic that make me want to do those things.
Well, it makes sense.
and
I'm not sure. I think what you did made sense. You know, I don't think it's not necessary. I wouldn't call it necessary, and I wouldn't call it uncharacteristic either, because I think we do see those movements here and there in different songs. Yeah, die. We do it. We do it. You know.
Yeah.
You know.
So yeah,
And
does
by
anybody...
the way, you know, these Hasidic songs right at the end of the right. If we're looking at these songs, they're from the sometime in the 19th century. It's not like they're from 1640, right? It's not like they didn't know about harmony. You know, they didn't necessarily think of it the same way we did, or they didn't necessarily use as much of it.
Mhm.
But it's not like purely modal music in that sense. I don't think.
Well, that to me is what that. So, and this is I'm just going on pure instinct of having now played a lot of these tunes, is that I feel like the more Klezmer, this is a sweeping, broad stereotype. I'm going to make a broad character as knowing that it's totally not. It's only true. It's not really true, but I'm going to just say it anyway, which is that I find that in the more klezmer-y tunes, things that I associate with being klezmerish, have more of like a modal approach, like where you're really wanting to stay on your tonic, and then the melody moves in tension away from your tonic note, and then it's very possible to hold that tonic, and then the interest comes from the tension there. Whereas I find that a lot of the Hasidic nigunim that I sort of know, like, have some of these more sort of movements implied in them. And then, once again, I know that's a very gross generalization, but like there's a certain variety of them, like this Skochna that we've been looking at, that like it's so natural to want to go down to that major, you know.
I can't answer that.
Sorry, the dropping to the subtonic, that is one of the characteristics of Hasidic nigun.
Okay, well then there it is. Okay.
Yes. In fact, you see that if you just open Sefer Nigunim of Chabad, it's there from the very first pieces, and also in Beregovsky's collection, it just hits you in the head. You know, it's very characteristic. Also, I'd like to recommend Peter Manuel, about 25 years ago, wrote a very good article about how modal musics integrate chords using several cultures from South America and klezmer music. I was one of his informants at the time. So, but he talks about a number of different musics. Peter Manuel, I probably have a PDF. I should check.
Can you send me the citation, and I'll see if we can't get a copy of it, get a permission to post it
into the
This
comments.
is part of our articles collection, because you know there's a lot of people who are really interested in these questions, and having examples from different kinds of music is like super helpful.
Yeah. No, Peter thought of this as a subject decades ago, because he was involved with several musics where you had this, you know, basically modal musics that also, you know, is using some chords. I think Robert Garfield's article about Musica La Tariasca from 1981 discusses this to some extent.
Cool. So I preempted Bob's question to ask Jordan for a tune that on its surface does not appear to be Hasidic, and that with deeper examination makes Jordan think that it is. Well, you said you might have some examples that.
Well, I think there are. I just think that there are things that we don't categorize automatically as Hasidic, but like I say, so many of those Skochnas that we see in the second half, for instance,
Of Motel Raider, you mean?
Yeah. I'm trying to. I'm trying. I have this learner one up, but that's not the one I meant. And there's
The Yechiel Learner one.
Yeah. But Leofiel Learner's one is good too, by the way, because it's yada da 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 ya da da ya da 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 ya da da ya da 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 da. You know, I'll share it for a second.
Yeah, you share it too.
I mean,
is that the one that you taught, Clara, in your thing? Okay.
Yeah, that to me is so totally like you know, it's funny. I said it's like I can't make up my mind. You know, I think that Yud K Vav K Yud Hey Vav Hey structure of the tune is a giveaway that's a Hasidic tune. But the fact is that that so many of these songs are in fact like, you know, two-part nigunim, and liturgical in nature in the sense of sticking to nusach. But look, check this one out here. I'm making a mess of my office here, which is kind of a superfluous statement. Which, I mean, I played a lot of Lubavitch tunes that sound like this. I don't know that this is a Lubavitch tune, but I mean, if that's not a Hasidic tune, you know,
you're gonna eat your yarmulke.
I'm gonna eat Babe Ruth's straw hat.
Where did you learn this? Or where is it from?
This is in the heft, in the first heft. This is Kremenetz.
Kremenetz.
You see that? Yeah, you feel learn from Kremenetz. Do you see the?
Oh yeah, it's very small, but I see it there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh yes. Yechiel Lerner from Kremenetz.
Yeah, you know, with whom I'm not. You know, he and I have never had coffee together, but I mean, this is like, you know, there's sort of like there are like these sort of those 4-part melodies and the ABCD melodies, and then they're like these sort of like I think of as grind them out melodies that we sometimes play sets of for Hasidim, especially when you're doing the, like I say, the sort of deeper cut Hasidic crowds, where you'll just like you grind out one after the other these 2-part nigunim and I think that this definitely falls into that category.
Actually, this is something that is not characteristic for me to say, but this dafka sounds a bit Ukrainian to me. It's not very characteristically Jewish. I think you could make a case. And Kremenetz, you know, again, nobody worked there. Nobody collected in Kremenetz, the extreme west, you know, going to Galicia. So we're not, you know, except
that they did. I mean, somebody went there. Like,
yeah, but I mean, no, but musicologists didn't. Beragovsky did not go there.
Right, but so that also begs the question about what, you know. And again, I appreciate your point about the creativity and the sort of unique characteristics of Hasidic repertoire. But there's a lot of Hasidic repertoire that just, I mean, that does take its coloration from the surround.
That's a small proportion.
Yeah.
Maybe 10-15%. It's been grossly exaggerated by the sort of feel-good, even before the war, Ukrainian scholarship. You know, there was a conference in Moscow last year where we had this kind of, you know, Ukrainian big brother kind of thing with Hasidic music. And Mikhail Lukin afterwards had to speak and say, no, it ain't so. It's a very small part of the repertoire of any Hasidic group. And actually, Locus Classicus for Ukraine, go to Beragovsky's Hasidic collection. And you will find precious little that resembles Ukrainian music.
And you think this feels Ukrainian to you?
To me, I mean, it's not characteristically Klezmer. It's not so characteristically Ashkenazic. It's not so characteristically Hasidic. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't publish anything about it. But if you want to look at more carefully about the cadences and the rhythmic formulas that you see, I believe there are Ukrainian tunes that resemble this. But I don't want to talk, off the top of my head.
So, but
How this-
Jordan just said,
Yeah,
I'm just going to call you back to something that Jordan just said when he pulled this melody up, was that it reminds him of some other tunes. Is that right, Jordan?
That's exactly what I said.
Yeah,
Again, but
yeah,
that doesn't necessarily, I hate to say it, I hate to undermine my own argument. That doesn't necessarily mean anything, because part of my problem, okay, and this is a Jordan problem, and I mean this not as in a joking way, but I have a extensive experience, let's say, playing music for Hasidim, that's Hasidic music now, and in the 80s, when it was way more Hasidic than it is now.
80s.
That in the 80s, starting in the early 80s, but when you could still do, when the Hasidic wedding still sounded like a Hasidic wedding as opposed to a Las Vegas rock concert or pop concert. But having said that, that is with the caveat that even by the 1980s, the mixing was already, I think, probably, and the emphases was probably way more Americanized. So so it's hard to say. It's sort of like we can put a spotlight on it, but we're not sure what we're really looking at. When I look at through lines, and this I mentioned to you before, when I look at through lines, and I like that terminology. So we go back to Belf, and the song I always think of is Napoleon, right? With Napoleon, when I played a recording for that for a friend of mine, and he said, that's familiar. I said, well, of course it's familiar. It's what we started. It's what we used to just call a Stolen or Niggin, and now they call it Moshe Emes. So it's really funny, and this goes back to our whole discussion. And I brought this up before, and I want to actually speak to this a little bit, because I think this is a microcosm of that whole problem, of that whole challenge, which is, and I'll stop sharing this. The whole challenge in all of these discussions is that there are musics working in so many different directions. So you take Moshe Emes, and a Klezmer, a Klez camp or Klez Canada person will say to me, "Oh, Moshe Emes, a great Hasidic song." So that's not Moshe Emes. It's not Moshe Emes. It is Stolen or Niggin number 4, Stolen or Niggin number 1, Stolen or Niggin number 22. We only call it Moshe Emes. We only call it Moshe Emes because of the real sea change in how Hasidic music was performed, which was the introduction of singers in the late 80s. It started happening even a little earlier, but you really didn't see singers as a common thing at Hasidic weddings until two things happened. Number one is that a real commercial recording industry sprung up in the, did I accidentally close myself? I hope not.
No.
Commercial Hasidic Jewish music business opened up that changed tastes, made everything more Americanized. And then the second, much more disruptive event, which was the ban on musicians and the use of one-man bands. So you had these one-man bands starting to play at Hasidic weddings, and people that were singers at Hasidic weddings previously, who might come up and sing a specialty number, were now starting to make their mark as sort of gig singers with one-man bands, because someone had to carry the melody. So Moshe Emes is a perfect example of someone saying, "Oh, of course it's Moshe Emes." No, it's only Moshe Emes because the singers felt stupid singing die 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 die. So they put words to it so they could then, and it's part of this whole gradual shift, which started slowly and then took on speed as it rolled downhill, of shifting the focus of Hasidic music. So why am I saying all this? To say that we have influences working in opposite directions. So when someone says nowadays, I want to, let's say, reintroduce the use of Hasidic music in the Klezmer repertoire, I say you should, because when I look at the hefts, I say there's so much Hasidic music that we don't identify specifically as Hasidic music. And to speak to something, Clara wrote when she did I read her master's thesis, a very good master's thesis. When you had discussions with American musicians, like of the Pete Sokolow generation, the guys who are now in their 80s, speaking about the musicians that would be, if they were alive, around 100 or 110, what they'll say is, well, we couldn't play klezmer music anymore, so we ended up toiling in the salt mines of the Hasidic repertoire in the 1950s and 60s. The Hasidic repertoire of the 1950s and 60s was different than the repertoire in the 70s and 80s, but it was much closer. But there was still way more similar between, let's say, 1950 and 1985 than there was between 1985 and 1992. All right. You weren't toiling in salt mine. So the way the first generation Americans look at the Hasidic music was that it was separate from Klezmer, because their view of Klezmer, let's say the Pete Sokolows, the Joel Shanays, the Harry Maxes, the guys, like I say, who would now be in their 80s or late 70s, early 80s, viewed Klezmer as the Dave Taras, Shlomo Beckerman repertoire, which would be Bulgars. And we know how that works now.
Shloimke was not only Bulgars. I'm sorry.
Right. Well, what I mean is, I'm talking about the generation. The generation,
Yes.
the generationally, what was emphasized in that generation. So they saw the Hasidic repertoire as maybe a step down from them, not realizing that what they were actually doing was relating to just another chunk of what would be considered Klezmer repertoire 90 years earlier. So I say all that.
But before you, we have some questions. We have some questions and comments that need to be addressed. So I'm going to ask you, Zev, to hold that thought.
Yeah.
I think, Jordan, you've made a great point there about.
But I just want to add, can I just finish that point?
Yeah, finish the thought.
So the example that I said very early on, where we see Bulgars not being not necessarily being in the category of Hasidic music, but yet they come in through the back door. The biggest example of that would be the fact that some Bulgars that made it to the early Palestinian settlements, and then coming back to New York as debkas and as what we would call either Yerushalmi horas or like the Omer horas, and there are a number of different examples of them, either Bulgars or shared repertoire.
Can you hum one that comes to mind?
Sure, I'll play it even. So here's one that I learned as a debka.
And can you wait before you do it, Han? Can you make sure that you have your settings so that the mic volume doesn't get?
Actually makes original sound on.
Yeah.
Turn away a little bit also. But here's
make sure that automatically adjust microphone volume is not checked. Is that correct, Bob Blacksberg?
Yes.
Correct. Just make sure that is.
I'm going to audio settings right now. It's not checked. It's not checked. Okay, good.
Okay, good. Thank you.
So here's an example of a song that I learned as a debka that was actually part of the Bulgar repertoire. Even shows up in Kostakovsky. This is how I learned about it. And I said I almost had a heart attack when I saw it. That's the beginning of it. It's a Bulgar. It's a known Bulgar.
Oh my God!
You learned it as a debka. What do you mean when you say you learned it as a debka?
I learned it as when in the mid '60s. In the mid '60s, according to Pete Sokolow, it was an Ashkenazi Israeli named Abe Goldenthal, who just recently passed away. He came from Israel to New York, and he brought all these songs that they had been playing on gigs in Israel with him, and that was one of them. So debka would be like that Hasidic. What they call a hora, which is basically sort of like a modified Bulgar dance, where it's like this rhythm, right? So that is from the Bulgar repertoire, and here we are doing it in a totally different way for what we call the second dance music of a Hasidic wedding.
Amazing.
So what I mean to say is that, we're so sure what we know as repertoire, but we're a nomadic people, so things show up in unexpected places, and I think we have to accept that to a certain extent about even things that we see from 80, 90, 100 years ago, in terms of traveling. And I think that, it's really interesting that Zev brought up before the idea that this sort of Ukrainian influence on Lubavitch music. I mean, they were really far away from each other, and yet one of the biggest sources for Lubavitch Nigudim is the town of Nikolaev, which is not in Belarus.
It's in Ukraine.
But
again, the Nikolaev stuff is very, very Wallachian and Greek and Crimean Tatar.
And yet it's
not Russian at all. But what I wanted to say was that I had a student, a Palestinian student from Gaza, when I was in Abu Dhabi. And she was surprised to learn that in the Galil, in the 19th century, there were Arabic-speaking Hasidim, and they got along well with Arabs and with Druze, and they had a kind of mixed repertoire of dancing, of dapki and freilachs. So she actually did some work on YouTube, and she did a very nice paper on the Hasidic dapki
Oh my goodness.
in Palestine. And she went on to become a worker in interfaith dialogue.
Wow.
Great.
She's still in Abu Dhabi.
I'm gonna put a pin in this fascinating conversation. Thank you for that, Zev. And maybe you can send us some links so we can see those YouTube videos that she cites in her paper. That would be, I'm sure a lot of people here would be super fascinated about that. And there's lots of things in the chat, and I want to just make sure that the people who have written these things get a chance to speak to them. Way up earlier, Eric Rangel asked, was the intent of the Hasidic melody to bring something divine down to earth? And also he comments that Yechiel Lerner was a Baal Tefillah, so connections, right? But can you speak a little bit about the intent and what is a niggin supposed to do? Jordan, maybe you can speak to that, or Zev.
I'll
just
speak to
very briefly.
I'll speak to that a little bit, just to say that it's definitely part of the Baal Shem Tov. Have this idea that of refocusing on nigun as a specific spiritual tool. In Kabbalah, when they speak of gates in heaven, they say that the nagina, the gate of nagina, the gate of song, was next to the gate of tshuva, of repentance. So they're definitely part of Hasidic philosophy. That song is a tool by which you achieve religious ecstasy, and I would say that's one thing that I think at this point, I think we're pretty commonplace. I think that's a pretty commonplace assessment of how the Hasidim viewed song as a tool of religious ecstasy, religious connection. We talk about Dveikus Nigunim. Dveikus specifically is from the word Davak, which means Hebrew word, Lashon Kodesh word, Davak, which means to cling. So that's one thing to think about. At the same time, there are tradition in Hasidim, especially, again, something we see so explicitly in Lubavitch, where they speak explicitly about it, where they take secular songs or songs from non-Jewish sources, and what they talk about is being mekadesh them, being, sanctifying them. So among contemporary Lubavitchers, one of the big examples is there's a march that they call Napoleon's March, which they claim to have heard when Napoleon was invading Russia, and that's now like a part of Chabad repertoire. Marseillaise, by the way, is another one that you'll sometimes play at Chabad weddings because of this very specific intention, not just to say that we're going to mekadesh ourselves through song, but we're going to mekadesh songs through our adoption of them. And there are Russian songs that I think function like that in certain Hasidic groups, Chabad among them, and other groups.
So that's great, Jordan, because I want to ask Reuven, do you want to ask your question, or do you have some really interesting comments here? And I'd rather have you say them than me read them, if that's okay with you. Are you there?
Here I am.
Yeah.
It's about the melody that Jordan has played, that's Freilich. I remember it's a really popular song in former Soviet Union, I would say. And I don't know if you know Ilya Saitanov.
Yeah.
There from Moscow. There is a Jewish resource in Russian, Eshkolot, the college. He has submitted a couple of podcasts about researching the origin of this same tune, because as with other tunes like that, each nation either claims that it's their own or says that it's somebody else's. So for this specific tune, he did some research, because again, he was traveling, in some expeditions, gathering some first-hand material, and different people, they say that it's not their national tune, somebody else's. I think somebody claimed that it was Jewish, but he didn't really submit a Jewish version, but now we have it, as I say. So he had found that at least some recordings 100+ years ago from some old records, it was probably what he had found, the origin from some North Caucasian region, one of so-called Lizginka songs, as far as I remember. But actually this tune was, as I wrote, it was popular and all over the European part of Russian Empire, from I think from southern Ukraine and Black Sea region up to Finland. So everywhere there was similar tune with some minor versions, but I think he didn't bring the Jewish version, but now, as I said, now we have it. So I can tell him that add this to his research that I was.
Fantastic. That's great. Thanks for bringing that. Zev, did you write "These are not the same tune"? Is that, what did you mean by that?
Oh,
You're muted, Zev. You are still muted, Zev.
He was referring to that tune I played before that was some functioning as a Bulgar, and I learned it a different way. That seems to be the conversation.
I'm sorry. Are we talking about the tune that goes da 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 dee da 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 da? That is not the Russian tune. That
No.
No,
We're not talking about that. That's not the tune we're talking about. We're talking about the tune before that.
Tune before that, which goes how? Talking about.
No, you were right. This was referring back to where you pointed out that it was recorded in Bakou in the 1970s.
No, I don't think that's the tune that Reuven was talking about.
No, not Reuven was talking about.
No, but
No, he's talking about the KMDMP learner tune,
which goes?
I think.
Which goes?
Yeah.
How?
The learner.
Yes, I think
Again,
so.
that's not the same tune. The tune
Right.
that
I know, we know that, Zev.
So
They're not-
why is this relevant?
I believe that Reuven was talking about everything that Reuven has just said
Yeah.
is about the learner tune, not about this one that later Jordan talked about. Is that right, Reuven?
Yeah.
But that's not the learner tune either.
What's that?
These are not the same tune.
Oh, so Zev, you're
We understand that, Zev.
no. So
There was
Zev,
no claim made that yumpai da 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 da.
No.
That
but
that
the
is
learn-
not the same
the
as.
learner- I
No,
think
Zev,
that-
you're saying something ignorant now.
Nobody's claiming that those are the same tunes.
Zev, you're saying that the learner tune isn't that transnational.
no, that's right.
Interesting.
I'm not
But it
so
has
sure.
some elements of it.
Elements it has.
Yes. Yeah.
Elements it has. With tunes that are that simple, it's easy to just lump them together. But the natives of those cultures wouldn't do that.
Uh-huh.
They hear important differences.
Are you seeing that even though the melody is the same?
It's not the same. It's
Not
similar.
quite the same.
I don't think it's similar at all.
Uh-huh.
I think I agree with Sherry. I think that there's that major chord thing, die 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 die, which I think is what made Reuven think of that.
Yeah, but that's not enough.
Yeah, no. and the B section where you go die 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 die.
Mm-hmm.
That also he sang.
It's similar. It's somewhat similar. But look, as as Christina and Clara have shown, if you make a chart of sections of different tunes, you'll find sometimes similarities in widely different melodies.
Absolutely.
Okay. So yeah, it's neither here nor there.
Okay, well, I'm going to turn this back to Reuven, and he and Ilya are going to do some more work on this, and they'll come back and they'll report back to us. Maybe Reuven, you won't do this, but you can send that to Ilya.
I just want to get at least the number of the tune.
Yeah, Jordan, can you say the number of that one?
It's 136,932. By the way, if you play those numbers, you might win that $440 million Mega Millions, but no guarantees.
So I'd love to open the floor to more comments and questions, and then also to maybe we can wrap our conversation up on sort of what's next. I mean the obvious what's next is that we need to look at more tunes. We need to finish digitizing our melodies and really start working on them in a sort of looking at things not just as individual items, but in putting things together on the heft level and finding through lines. So that's a pretty obvious thing that we need to do. But
one thing I'm going to propose about that is something that I said I wanted to do, and making a wedding kind of got in the way. So I actually think that one thing we can do, we can start by and this is something where I have some connections to do this, is actually take maybe 5-10 tunes and ship them off to Shmuel Sandel, Shalom Sandel, who is a guy in Monroe, who's actually done a lot of work. He doesn't realize it, but he's an ethnomusicologist who for the purposes of in the 1970s, 60s even, started writing down basically every Hasidic tune he knew so that musicians could play them. And I think that he's got an amazing library, which has not seen the light of day. And I'm going to try and see if I can pry that out of him a little bit and see if I just show it to him and say, hey, do you recognize any of these? That might be a good place to start. You know, finding 4 or 5 different people in that position. But Tzien Moshe Rosenberg might be another person to go to, and I know him too, and he might have some contributions.
Janet, I see you're there and you've unmuted yourself.
Yeah, yes, thank you. I wanted to ask Jordan about just the sheer numbers of tunes that he might have recognized as ones that he either knew or had played, ones that he saw, just to quantify, because we've been looking at specific tunes. You know, how many tunes did you recognize in here, and how many have you played?
So in the stuff that Christina sent me specifically for this class, I didn't see any, or this session, I didn't see anything that I specifically remembered. I saw tunes with little bits and pieces of things that I recognized, but I didn't see any. But in the hefts, yes, there are some songs that come up occasionally. Bob Bob did one second, let me find that. Blah, 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 blah. How to get started, tunes, text, liturgy. Here we go. This one right here. It's a famous one. We've all seen this. I'll share screen for just a second, just to show you. The Acrobat Reader. Here we go. Now, why isn't it opening up what I want to open up? 1 second. It's in the.
And Janet, while he's looking for that, the one that I sent Jordan kind of a list of about 30 tunes that just had kind of, we go through our play along files and I'll make little marks on my tablet for each tunes. And so these are about 30 tunes that had come up in one way or another that made me think, is this a Hasidic tune? But that wasn't otherwise labeled as being that. And I think Hef 59 is like totally filled with nigurim. Is that right, Jordan? And I don't know.
That's the heft. Yeah, that's what. So this song I have on screen share right now, right? This doesn't strike me. It's in the Niggin collection in Beregovsky. It shows up in Israel and it's called Mitzvah Doula. I have to be honest with you. Other than the fact that I already knew the song and knew that it had like a kind of interesting circuitous route to the bandstand, it didn't strike me as particularly something I was familiar with as Hasidic in origin. But I'm not going to rule it out either. It's hard. We can't draw conclusions from. Here's just a little Hasidic inside baseball. You can't draw if something shows up as a Breslov tune now. You can't draw conclusions that it's an actual old Breslov Hasidic tune, because Breslov is occupies a very interesting social place in Israeli culture, in like the Israeli Baal Tshuva culture, or we call the Neo-Hasidic culture. So I'm not going to draw any, like I can't draw a raya from it. I'm not going to draw a proof from it that I know that it is Hasidic in origin. It didn't strike me as Hasidic in origin, but then again, there's a lot I don't know. But this is a song that I recognize right away, obviously. In Beregovsky, what I always call them is like Beregovsky bonuses, songs in Beregovsky, and then which means that they're somewhere in the hefts probably. But in Beregovsky, I've identified a bunch of nigunim for which there's a current through line. One is Beregovsky 104, one is Beregovsky 130 something.
Right.
Which shows up as a Simchas Torah tune. Which means that we haven't stumbled across it yet, or if it is, we just haven't put a spotlight on it yet. That it would be in the heft, but I think it would be in the heft.
So Jordan, Sherry's got her hand up, so we're gonna take her question. And Zev instructed me and pointed out something quite useful that I've carried with me, which is to say that not a lot of the Kiselhof material actually shows up in Berezovsky. Like, it's quite limited. Makonovetsky, yes. There's plenty of Makonovetsky in Berezovsky because they were correspondents, but the Kiselhof material, there's a couple of tunes from Gershkovitz, but not a whole ton more. So that's going to be worth investigating too, to just keep in mind as we're looking. And for the record, Hef 59 is a total mess. Like, some of the pages are upside down. Many of them don't have K numbers, but there's tons and tons of tunes in there. So it's going to be a matter of doing a deep dive into there and kind of trying to get a sense of what's going on. And so over to you, Sherry.
Thank you. Well, you know, my knowledge is in the recorded repertoire, not so much in the manuscript world. But I'm kind of, I mean, since there are tunes in the material that do appear in recordings, and I think it's a legitimate question, which is, to what extent does the titling referencing something Hasidic have anything to do with whether the tune has a Hasidic origin? You know, if it's Ben Rebbe's Tish, or if it's there's so-and-so, such and such Chassid or Chassidol, does that mean that it has some kind of Hasidic yichus?
Oof.
Bye, Alan. Thanks for coming, by the way. Nice to see you. Okay, go ahead.
That's probably a question for Zev, I would
Yeah,
imagine.
totally. Zev, you were, yeah.
Yes, okay, Sherry, you hit the jackpot. Yes, that's absolutely. And that's true from Belf, it's true for Dave Taras, it's true for almost everybody. And it doesn't mean that we take literally. And also, some of the titles are a little bit, fanciful,
Or nostalgic, I say.
Yeah. Also, some of the Hasidic tunes with specific rebbes like Trisk or here or there, some of those tunes were migrating around. But yes, Hasidic, put it this way, a Chassidol it was. Now, as I stress in my chapter, Chassidol was not Hasidic music. Mm-hmm. Chassidol was normal Jewish dance music a la Hasid,
right?
Which was a big factor. Okay, and then there are other things which, unfortunately, in my book I didn't really get around to, is the Hasidic Skotchna repertoire. There was such a thing as Hasidic Klezmer music. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, Berezovsky could not research that. God forbid.
Was that?
So he couldn't go there. He couldn't go there.
You mean from a political point of view, right?
From a political point of view, of course.
Yeah.
Okay, so that turns me back to Motel Raider. I think that's going to put Motel Raider into even more focus
on the radar.
On the yes.
Very nice.
Oh boy,
nice.
I see what you did there, Zev. We see what you did. Very nice, very nice. I have an example of this actually, but if people want to stay for like a little bit after, we could maybe look at this tune, because this is a tune that I'm looking at the Raider Skotchnas, and I came up with one that I have questions about. But Jeff, do you have anything that you'd like to add here? I see you there. You're unmuted. Do you have a comment?
Well, just thinking out loud about, and you can take this as questions, if you can derive questions out of them. We're talking about a lot of different things all at once here, I think. And one of the things that I'm interested in is something that Jordan said at the beginning, or not at the beginning, but he said it somewhere in the middle, that that like maybe 90 or 100 years ago, the klezmer repertoire is sort of like the mainstream old-fashioned klezmer repertoire that we all know, was known to be Hasidic music, or a lot of it was. Anyway, not the Bulgars, but what Zev would call the core repertoire. And now, looking today at the Hasidic world, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like most of it is, at least in this country, is either from northern origin or more or less Hungarian, Satmar or Carpathian, and the traditions that were recorded that were known to be 100 years ago. In other words, that region, that tradition, isn't done very much today in the Hasidic world. Or
Uh,
it's- yeah. And so that may be a big part of why. I mean, I remember like at a certain point, as you know, just as a player, and with a lot of other players that I was friends with, we used to look around for Hasidic tapes, and at least for me, I used to listen to these tapes looking for possible repertoire. And I'm talking about contemporary, modern, and there's very, very little that was even usable. Like you think, well, and every once in a while, maybe you'd find a tune, and even then you'd have to change it a bit. You'd certainly play it in a different way for the klezmer style. So in other words, like we're in a way, to some extent, we're comparing apples and oranges, because or let's say that's why you're not hearing maybe.
Well, I don't understand your reference, Jeff. Do you
Yeah.
mean to say with the music that you were looking for, you mean you were looking for authentic Hasidic music that was part of its longstanding Hasidic traditions, or you meant newly composed Hasidic music from
I
the
meant popular. It's the kind of stuff you'd get on 13th Avenue, or in a
Right. Okay.
right.
Right.
And
So there is a lot of actually nuganology coming out of those groups, more in Israel than in America. You have, but you did have composers who were writing new Hasidic music that was actually of a nigun basis rather than a pop basis.
yes, but I'm not saying that. I'm not talking necessarily pop music, but even there just wasn't very much that was recognizable as the same kind of music. And I'm not talking about, no, because I take it for granted you'd have to pull it out of the pop beat, even if it was, but even without that.
Right. So, yeah, so I jokingly refer to that as the difference between G minor and C minor. And what I mean by that is, when you go to a gig today and you play a song in C minor, or actually G minor and D minor is a subset of that, and then there's C minor. It's a funny thing. When we talk about C minor songs, what I mean is that there's a song with a lower section and a higher section, and they actually say, "Oh, play the low part, play the high part," and that's actually sort of and that's where you see the influence of American folk songwriting, and like Shlomo Carlebach, who I think claims not to be influenced by American folk songwriting, but of course he was lying. You see the influence of that, and you see the influence of some of the Israeli composers who got into the Israeli Hasidic Song Festival and changed maybe what the repertoire is. So those I call like the C minor songs. And this is just my language. The G minor songs, the ones that like sit right in the middle of the range of vocal range, those are the ones where it's much more, where even if it's written now, it's much more characteristic of Hasidic style. You see a lot of them from bells, let's say. Bells are Nugunim. There are still bells are Nugunim being written now that sound like part of the tradition. And then there are Nugunim from other groups where I think it sounds less so. And I think that my categorization is, like I say, it's just a sort of informal joke.
I mean,
myself.
some of the actually some of the ones that really did sound occasionally like real, the stuff that I was looking for was Vishnitsa. Some of them,
Yes,
not very many, but some of them. And bells, yeah, it could be too, but those are in the, Vishnitsa is Romanian, bells is Ukrainian. So that's still within that, where most of the, because I don't know if I said this, but the recording, the recorded klezmer music that we have is overwhelmingly from those areas, from either South Ukraine, Southwest Poland, Galicia, or Eastern Romania.
well, that's
But
fair. That's fair because
Huh?
even Bubov you'd call southeast. Well, Bubov is southeast Poland.
But listen, what I mean is, look, do you hear Lubavitcher? I don't hear. There's hardly anything in Lubavitcher that is in klezmer music, the old-fashioned klezmer music. I mean, I'm not saying they didn't have klezmer music, but I'm saying it didn't get recorded in the 1920s. Maybe a little bit. I don't know, but very little.
That's an interesting point. I wonder if that's a geographic question too, where
It is a geograph. This is all a geograph.
what I mean is where the recording industry was also. And
That's a
Yeah.
very deep topic that we're going pretty.
What
I
exactly?
want to say something about that. Though one other point about that, keeping in mind, in the 1920s, Lubavitchers were on the run. All right, so that is also part of it. Lubavitch was kind of a dissipate community.
No, but listen, the people who did the 95% of the recording of klezmer music were from either from Ukraine, Eastern Romania, or not even that much, but Eastern Romania, or Poland. You could see it with the Boybrika Capelli is a good example. With all the guys there were from those areas. Nothing else.
I mean, we can't answer that question.
But
right
I think that's politics are involved. I think politics of the Russian Revolution and the disarray in post-revolution Russia has something to do with that also, though. Lubavitch was interesting. Lubavitch is a very interesting example. And look at Mudgets, right? We don't have Mudgets recordings until the 1950s, right?
Yeah.
Mudgets was totally displaced in the 19-teens and the 1920s because they were smack on the Eastern Front. So you've got these great Mudgets of recordings, in the 1950s, cataloging, which is starting to record music that's been kicking out in their world for for at least 80 years.
Well, I have to say that my familiarity with post-war Hasidic recordings is not remotely comparable to yours. So I'm not getting into it in that degree of detail. And I'm just saying that. And that isn't even my main point. My main point was actually geographical and chronological. And this may not even be what the topic is today, but that's what I thought it was. That, like, how are we recognizing? How do we recognize Hasidic music in the klezmer repertoire?
No, it's in the Kiselhof repertoire, not in the klezmer repertoire.
Oh, the Kiselhof.
In our specific corpus. That's what we're talking about.
And if we see connections to other things, again, I go back to my Napoleon Doula example, right? We see Hasidic music in Belf, right? And Zev has pointed out other examples, and I think that
sure,
because
but where is Belf from?
Not from right, no. But he's also a little earlier too.
A little earlier, yeah.
It's a little earlier.
Not much though.
World War I hasn't been fought yet. Russian Revolution hadn't happened yet.
It's the same time. I mean, this Kiselhof is being collected in 20.
Right, but all of it is pre-World War I.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So let's acknowledge that this enormous disruption. We always in contemporary American culture we always talk about the Holocaust, right? But we know that World War I was at least on a cultural level, so just as disruptive. Forgetting about and wiping out, killing millions of people. Even before that, we had this totally disruptive event, which dislocates communities. And one of the nigunim I'm teaching at Klez Canada is a Mizmor LeDavid, a Mudget's Mizmor LeDavid, because it's an example of a Mudget's opera. These multi-section pieces with fast sections, slow sections, choral sections, solo sections, the changes of a meter. Right? Its nickname is a Mizmor LeDavid. Its nickname is Nigun of the Homeless. Right? Because Mudgets was drifting around, they uprooted communities where So
aren't we talking about we're talking about instrumental klezmer music, I have to apologize because I didn't understand that it was Kiselgof collected stuff from Chabad too.
Right.
Right, but Jeff, we're talking about the corpus that we have in front of us. That's specifically what we're talking about. I mean, the conversation has gone very far afield, but the point of the session is to be talking about how we think about interpreting what we're finding in our corpus that we have in front of us,
where it's not specifically noted. I think if we when you come across a tune from Kiselgof and it says Chabad or from the Lieutenant Lyubovici, or how we're pretty sure that we're pretty sure that falls into that category, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, okay, sorry, I
Don't be sorry.
Well, I'm just saying that the corpus of, when you're talking about World War I, for example, I totally agree with what you said, except that the music that we have isn't just before World War I. Most of it, the American stuff, is after World War I, but it's still music from basically it's music from before World War I. But they have it. There's a lot of people recording it, this stuff.
Yeah,
See what I mean?
Lubavitchers, let's say, as an example, let's use an example. Lubavitchers and the Satmars, well, Satmars is a bad example. Lubavitchers weren't here in as much force before, in the 1920s.
But even if they were, who was going to record Satmar stuff on?
It was not commercially viable music, and I would like to move on from this topic. Zev has put in the chat a couple of his reference from the chapter about the Southern repertoire and the American recording industry and so like that. And so I think I just want to move on from that one topic because I think that's something that we can cover in a different discussion. We're almost 2 hours into this conversation. And we were going to go for about an hour and a half. So we're a little bit over time. But I do want to give the opportunity that if anybody does want to stick around, that maybe I could play one more piece that I have questions about from our corpus. And the rest of you can be released to go home and go out and enjoy the rest of your very hot, steamy day.
Should we ask if there's any more questions?
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, Irina, you have unmuted yourself. Do you have a question? Oh, she just muted herself again. Bob, do you have a question?
No, I want to put in a plug, if I may. That is, there's plenty of opportunity to register for the online Klez Canada on July 31st and August 1st. Jordan has been referring to the in-person Klez Canada, August 22nd to 28th at Camp B'nai B'rith, where some of us will hope to see each other again in 3 dimensions, even though we believe that we've lost our 3rd dimension in the pandemic. But I hope that people will join us in online Klez Canada for some part or another, run from Klezmer Central in the Jewish universe, my bedroom.
It's getting a little crowded in there, isn't it, Bob?
If you saw how much equipment's in here, you'd say so, yeah.
So I wanted to know, I think one of the questions that came up at the beginning was, why is this important? And I wondered whether anybody had anything to say about why is it important to identify things as specifically Hasidic.
Oh, I have an answer for that,
I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, well, obviously, because this is, of course, is a subject of one of my kind of like pet peeve campaigns, which is based on how I talked about how the informants were talking to Clara in her work about Hasidic music. I think that it's important first of all, from a Jewish point of view, I think that this Jewish value in making sure we understand that as we expand our understanding of klezmer music, I'm not going to say there's a religious value, but it's certainly a Jewish value. You can say it's religious if you want. I think as we expand our understanding of klezmer music, and I think that to me, what the biggest thing about just pouring through and digitizing some of the songs and pouring through the repertoire that we've been doing in Kiselgof, when we start to realize the vastness of the repertoire, which we've always known must have been true, but we didn't necessarily have the papers in front of us, and as we start to dig into that. Just the idea that you see again and again these characteristics that say, well, that must have been a Hasidic tune, that must have been a Hasidic tune. So maybe it's more, maybe it's slightly less than we think of at first. But just the idea of restoring and I think that, again, and I give a lot of credit to Zev, and there are other people who have been thinking along these lines as well, from among the first generation of the klezmer scholars that were re-examining things in the late 70s, early 80s, just restoring Hasidic music to its rightful place in the corpus of Jewish instrumental music is itself a religious, a cultural, and perhaps a religious value. Just the idea that there's a Hasidic musical culture which is part and parcel of what we consider, for want of a better term, our klezmer repertoire or our instrumental Jewish repertoire. I think that in of itself is of great cultural value. But I think it also has messages for us as contemporary performers to understand when we're performing contemporary Hasidic music, and I'm not, again, not referring to the Celine Dion contemporary klezmer music, but to the nigunim that are still being played. I think it's very important for us to use what we learn about the place of Hasidic music in the klezmer repertoire to inform our performances of Hasidic music on the contemporary bandstand. Something for which, by the way, not to bitch too much about it, something for which I have actually been highly criticized. Because when I go on the Hasidic bandstand, I say, this is clearly a Hasidic music of a particular period, a particular region, particular, I come up with a certain kind of understanding. I say it should be performed in a characteristic fashion. And I think that contemporary Hasidim, especially the young musicians who are trying to not be, trying to Americanize, they're going through the same, let me backtrack. Understanding the place of Hasidic music in the klezmer repertoire and understanding the origins of the Hasidic music, even when we play it today, is going to be an important is going to give us an important sociological insight into the process of assimilation that current Hasidic communities, which are the fastest growing Jewish communities in the world, and certainly the fastest growing Orthodox observant Jewish communities in the world, the fact that they're undergoing the same assimilation into American culture process that, let's say, the Jews of the 1920s and 1930s did once they started, getting their feet solidly on the ground. And I think that we are seeing in real time all sorts of interesting breaks with ethnic and cultural traditions. So I think that our better understanding of the cultural traditions that were, let's say, extant 80, 100, 120, 140 years ago is going to help us understand what's happening in real time. So I think that those two things, the cultural aspects of it. But I think that there's a third thing, which is because we want to know, right? We do want to know in our performance of klezmer music, how to approach and how to categorize and how to put together things. And again, that's both for the contemporary bandstand and that's also for our understanding as klezmer concert performers. And I'll give an example, a very concrete example to me. When you speak to people who learned klezmer music in the 1980s on the Hasidic bandstands, Bettina Moshe Rosenberg was a pioneer of this, Ken Gross was a pioneer of this, and a few others who fell in love with the Pete Sokolow, Henry Sapoznik book, Complete Klezmer, they start playing Stille Bulgar and Hesa Bulgar and all the other Bulgars and that whole repertoire, very fiery music. And they see that as core klezmer repertoire. Discussion for another time. And when we now go back and play klezmer music for people who are requesting klezmer music for dancing, and I now know enough to say I'm not going to play a Freilach and a Bulgar together. Not necessarily because I have the same deep understanding of the dance moves that, let's say, Zev would bring to an educational environment and show us all how to do that, but simply because from a musicological point of view, I kind of say, I get it. These tunes, it's like playing Night and Day and then playing A Girl from Ipanema, right? You wouldn't do that even if you played the same swing beat for both tunes or the same bossa nova beat for both tunes. You wouldn't do it. It's Frankfurters and it's Frankfurters and peanut butter. So I think as contemporary performers, both on the concert stage and on the dance floor, I think knowing this helps us understand how we want to express ourselves musically. So I think those are three areas right there that we can talk about,
Jordan, that is such wonderful insight into all of this stuff. Like, really, bravo. Thank you. Very cool.
Well, I got the Frankfurter hot dog thing, the hot dog peanut butter.
We're keeping that.
Yeah, when I wanted to date a girl, and my friend said, "You dating her would be like Frankfurters and peanut butter."
Peanut butter.
I love the analogy.
I see.
I was a little insulted.
You kept it. You kept the analogy to use in other places. I see, Jeffrey, that you have a comment to add here, and I want to hear it from you. The thing I wanted to just add is that, like, being able to understand a figure like Motel Reder, we have this really lovely, beautiful heft from this one person. We also have beside it the Gershkovitz heften, where we know it's a person. We know that this is a fairly broad representation of their repertoire that they chose to write down for whatever reason. That's what we believe it to be. That being able to understand these specific figures for whom we do have a name and we have a location and we have a time. I think that understanding the intersection of the sort of Hasidic influence on them as performing and practicing musicians is going to be really, really helpful. Because Motel Raider in particular, his Dubno is like literally 500 kilometers north of like Yash, right? And so the Bulgar trail just blazed right north into Dubno. And he has the horas and the hangas and the da-da-da-da-da, all the things that we would talk about as being very Bessarabian sounding, right? But then he has this whole cache of other things which are very much of the Skochna. There's Belf tunes, there's these other maybe Hasidic klezmer music. We don't know enough to know right now, I think, about that. But that's, I think, for me, the interest in, for myself, understanding more about how to identify and think about Hasidic music in this context is going to be really a fruitful area of discussion. And in particular, since Gershkovitz does not have the Bessarabian component in his repertoire, not at all, right? So we have two figures from a similar time period whose repertoires are quite different. And so understanding the sort of Hasidic component of those two figures, I think, is going to be really interesting. So that's my 2 cents. And now I want to hand over to Jeff. You had some more things to maybe add.
No, I just, my comment was just that I really appreciated Jordan's finale there, the summing up very much. I think but so did everybody else, I think.
That's very kind of you
very
all.
interesting. Yeah.
I actually want to jump on something that you just said because it made me think of something else, which I think is really important. And it goes back to something that Zev pointed out before. I think that the better we understand the Hasidic element in the klezmer repertoire, we're going to better understand the other elements of the klezmer repertoire that maybe have other origins. Like, for instance, as Zev pointed out before, what he felt maybe, oh, this might be Ukrainian more than Hasidic, right? So I think that the more we can do in one area to understand characteristics, I think it will help us understand in other areas as well. So I think, it's like a joke, right? You know, at the beginning of Animal House, when you go to Faber College and there's a sign, if you ever saw the movie, which of course I think of as a scathing critique of society rather than as a juvenile exercise in silliness. Well, of course it's both, as am I. As am I. So on the logo for the college, it says knowledge is good, which of course is a joke. Knowledge is good. Of course knowledge is, right? But I think actually in this case, it actually means something significant, which is the more we know about any one element of what we're doing here, the more it's going to help us figure out what is not and what is, something worth categorizing or pursuing understanding. It would never have occurred to me, for instance, to today, because I'm not so well versed in this, and which is why we rely on our friends like Zev and Mark and others, who've been at this for a long time and who have done the field work. It never occurred to me to say, oh, that cadence is Ukrainian. And now that he said it, I say, oh yeah, you know what? That cadence, that particular kind of cadence, where you skip down a chord in a different kind of way than you would in a Hasidic tune. Yeah, that is kind of odd, and it shows up in some songs I know, and not in others. So I think that in general, anything that we get about any one of these things can help us in our understanding of other things. I mean, I think that's pretty much a truism. I think.
I'm going to say one more thing, which is that I think part of the reason we created this organization, Klezmer Institute, was to connect scholars and practitioners, and to bring the wisdom of the bandstand, into the discussions, the scholarly discussions, because culture bearers transmit their knowledge in all kinds of ways, and it's not always through the academy, right? And there's very deep and important knowledge that comes through dance and through practice on the bandstand. And so kind of that's part of the reason why we're here in the first place. But also, as an addition to that, Jordan, you're talking about taking some of this material and connecting it with your colleagues and acquaintances who have been doing deep work in Hasidic music to just collect tunes together, and that kind of bridge building is great. It's terrific.
Yeah, and it's so, and it's so funny, of course. You said, well, you're doing ethnomusicological work. They would say, no, I'm not. I'm just collecting tunes. Okay,
okay, fine.
Think what you want. It's okay.
I'd just like to volunteer for this particularly rich discussion, for which I don't think you've been running live transcript because I don't see it. is if you send me a link to the recording, Christina, I can run the audio through a transcription tool.
Oh,
And because I think there's sections of this, such as Jordan's eloquent finale, that may look pretty decent in transcription, notwithstanding what Otter.ai does to Yiddish words.
yeah.
But it actually does a pretty good job.
Thank you so much, Bob. That is a great. Thank you. We appreciate that. We didn't hit that button. But with this, I would like to just. I mean, we're really at 2 hours, and I want to just thank you, Jordan, so much for being here with us today. This is such a great conversation, and also to Zev, our interlocutor of a deep knowledge, and to Jeff. For sharing, and for Sherry, and for Bob and everybody, and Reuven, who all brought things to this conversation. And with that, we'll see you again very soon. Tune in a couple weeks from now for the High Holidays prep workshop. Okay.
Can I just say a thank you to?
Absolutely.
Please. So I want to thank you on a lot of different levels, and I'll try and keep it brief. This is really important to me, obviously, because I care. Obviously, I care about this stuff. And in the world where I exist, I may be one of the last people who cares about this stuff. But the being allowed and being invited to participate on this level and to interact with great scholars has been, of course, rejuvenating for me in so many ways. But I just want to say that the idea that the experiences that me and my colleagues have had, and even the ones that don't show up in klezmer spaces or in Yiddish culture study spaces, the idea that what we're doing may be more important than we realize, I think, is really, really important, and to remind people about. And it's most important to remind me about, because this whole experience for me has been one really that has been so affirming and rejuvenating, and I really, really appreciate the idea, the support, and the knowledge and the wisdom that I've gained from all of you, and I'm grateful for it on many, many personal and musical and scholarly levels. So I just want to thank you all for this experience, and thank you, Christina, for shepherding me to this place, and thank you, Zev, for being such a generous teacher, and Sherry being such a generous teacher, and Jeff being such a generous teacher for all of us, and everybody here who has so much wisdom to share. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. So thank you.
All right, everybody. I'm going to make a plug for the play along sessions. Richard Leskin is my buddy. He shows up at the noon play-alongs, and he comes in, even though he lives in the UK, he comes to the 7 p.m. Wednesday play-along sessions. Which is like epic. It is epic, and it's really thanks to Richard and some of the other pals who are regular people who come to those sessions that we were able to go through and say, that's interesting. Is it Hasidic? Is that a niggin? And so it's a really wonderful way to discover the repertoire. I go through, we put together a PDF, and we just play through stuff, and we just kind of encounter it for the first time. We're a little bit on summer hiatus right now, but we'll be picking them up in the fall, and you will hear about them when we do, and I'll look forward to seeing you then. So,
are we hanging out and telling jokes now, or are you shutting down the room?
We can tell some. Let's shut the recording off.